I'm Bryce Butler from Access Ventures, and this is More Than Profit, a show where I talk with founders, investors, entrepreneurs, and leaders of all kinds about living and working with purpose, how they do it, and why. This season focused on kind of conscious construction of kind of dynamic portfolios, really trying to dive into fund managers, strategies that are unapologetically about financial returns and also equally unapologetic about pursuing impact, and really trying to help our audience think through what that looks like, how they conceive of these strategies, what they're pursuing, the complexities of that, the challenges of that. And so it's been fun over the last season to kind of talk through different asset strategies, from venture focused on female founders or founders of color to affordable housing to even fixed income strategies, international microfinance, blockchain. And so today, in our kind of final episode, I get to connect with some friends that are really announcing kind of a new strategy, a new idea that's emerged kind of off of their collective histories, both personally, but also professionally. The things that they've done professionally in investments for collectively the past 3 decades is really impressive. The way they've been able to deploy money and help companies grow and return capital to investors. But now kind of taking those best practices and the experiences of impact and seeking a new strategy that aligns both of those. So today I've got Wright Steenrod and I've got Moses Icyishaka in literally in the flesh in the studio, which is kind of fun for me. But I'm going to start first with Moses, because Moses and I have worked together for a little while now, which has been really fun to be a kind of a part of his journey. But I want to kind of, Moses, talk to us about early days. You went to Princeton, which is impressive. You've got experience in investments, both at a pretty substantial firm, Chrysalis Ventures in Louisville, Kentucky. You've done in-house business development with one of the portfolio companies. You've worked with Access Ventures, helping build and structure our blockchain strategy for the last 3-4 years.
4 years going.
Yeah. But what drives you? I think I know you personally, so you and I talk about this all the time. But what was it like growing up? And what did that look like for you? And how did you find yourself kind of in investments to begin with?
I'll go with the medium length version of the story and maybe inevitably meander into the longer version. And
I think what's interesting though is just kind of your family specifically. Yeah. The thread of that, and even at Princeton where you started off in medicine, and now all of a sudden flip, and like what were the causes of that flip for you, and what drives you as you even think about this life and this career in investments?
Yeah.
Well, we were recruited into the dark side.
That was part of it too, right?
Yeah. No. So. I was born in Rwanda.
Yeah.
My parents were both from Rwanda. Grew up in part in Kenya. We left Rwanda during the conflict, and I always. Sometimes I describe my life as a series of fortunate events. Getting to Kenya, then getting to come to the States as students. For my parents. My parents came here initially to continue their education, and And then, landed at, a great high school here in Louisville, and then on to Princeton. And there's always, kind of this feeling of, okay, what's the, why? Why, have I been so fortunate in how some of these things have come together? And I think at a young age, and I'll start with the medical part. I mean, so, the story goes, growing up, my parents told me, hey, Moses, you can do anything you want to in the world as long as it's being a doctor or a lawyer. And it turns out that's a pretty common story among immigrants. Really, I thought it was an African thing. And then I learned, no. I mean, some domestic immigrants who have gotten to know, say they got 3 options. They got the engineer option. I didn't get that one. I just got doctor or lawyer. And, so I liked the sciences. I thought, again, back to that first thread around just feeling fortunate, I always sort of got excited about, okay, maybe I can be a doctor and move back to Rwanda, and kind of could be my way of giving back, or, just kind of putting my energy and kind of all these resources that I've gotten to work that way. And it was, the summer after my sophomore year of college that I really started to veer from that path. So, I mean, you're right. You guys ultimately pulled me into the dark side, but I'd already started my curiosity started really around then. And
well, wasn't it like an individual that was just encouraging you, like, hey, this is a path you're going down, or at least thinking about? What about building out a fuller view and really trying to understand?
Well, actually, so that actually goes even deeper. So that was a doctor. So and that was during my sort of high school, toward the end of my high school career, I'd gotten advice that you should shadow some doctors, see what it's like to be on the surgery floor. I thought maybe I wanted to be a surgeon. And I just remember this doctor who I got to know, that's an interesting story of its own right. So he came up in Bosnia and learned how to be a doctor basically by practice. Someone, another doctor kind of pulled him, into the operating room and said, hey, can you clean this wound or hold this down part? And anyway, so there was, and I'm sure there was also medical training, but that's kind of how he told that story. But he told me, hey, you're going to be inundated in the sciences for your whole academic career and then med school and beyond. You ought to, branch out and study something different. You've gotten a tremendous opportunity to go into great school, lots of great departments. So I took that to heart. I got on campus and really quickly in my first year fell in love with economic theory and started a course, curriculum and ultimately a major that was focused in on comparative politics, economics, political economy. And then I was still kind of pursuing my pre-med studies until, this summer I was in Rwanda doing, so I got Princeton to pay for an opportunity to go back and visit the grandparents.
There you go.
But I was doing research for a professor around the social determinants of health and, HIV specifically. And so I was traveling around the country, getting to meet different people and kind of, experience their stories. And I just remember that entire summer, I moonlit my research thinking about and talking to any and everyone I could find on kind of the themes of economic development and really entrepreneurship in the country. And there, I learned and my eyes were open to a ton of opportunity and a ton of entrepreneurs, but, kept kind of started to reflect on the fact that, most folks who were really entrepreneurial, even the folks who had great sort of education backgrounds were maybe starting a motorcycle taxi business, and because that's what you can do with a microfinance loan. There was a real capital gap once you start to get into real sort of enterprises at SME and beyond. And so, I started thinking then about, wouldn't it be interesting to kind of combine my academic passion and career around this theme of sort of access to capital? Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and so what's fascinating too is fast forward. So from Louisville, Kentucky, as you settle in the United States, that's kind of where your families kind of established themselves. And so you came back. So you graduate from Princeton, you come back, you've got this new pathway, but you come back to Louisville, Kentucky, where we don't have a lot of opportunities in the investment space.
Yeah, I wish I could say I just really missed Louisville and I wanted to commit to this community. And actually the story is a lot less glamorous. So basically, summer after my junior year, I get a wonderful opportunity to be a summer analyst at this large kind of mid-market giant private equity shop. I'm working from 10 a.m. to midnight and still from 9 a.m., 8 a.m. to midnight and loving what I'm doing because it's sort of I can start to see, okay, this is how you sort of think as an investor. Kind of it falls in line with those things that I'm starting to fall in love with. And so after that experience, I didn't realize how fortunate I was to get that experience. Into my senior year, I thought, okay, I want to be an investor, so I'll abandon the pre-med track. I'll have the conversation with my parents. I want to be an investor. I'm really passionate about this. I could have a great, impact doing this. But no one told me that those jobs generally aren't available for undergrads. And so, all my buddies are going to Goldman and kind of going through their investment banking and consulting interviews. And I'm like, look, I don't want to spend the next 2 years pulling together pitch decks at midnight. I know what my calling is, this is, and long story short, I graduate without a job, right? Because I can't land a job, this kind of dream job that I thought I was moving toward. And so, I come back, so here I was, this kid who went off to the great Northeast to Princeton, graduate without a job. I come back and I'm on my parents' couch thinking I made a horrible mistake. I should have just put in my 2 years,
But the interesting thing is you and I, we've known each other since then and before, but, meeting with you there and then you wanting to get into investments and really one of the only investment shops of that size and opportunity was Chrysalis Ventures.
Yeah.
And you literally made it a point to show up and get a unpaid internship or maybe a paid internship or something like that, but just show up.
Yeah.
And then you just kept showing up even after the time was over to where they're finally like, okay, we'll just hire you.
Yeah. And I mean, the funny thing is it was with principally the Iriba team, the now Iriba team, who I worked with for that. So, I mean, that's basically the story, right? So I was couch surfing at home. Really, I was in my bedroom. So
I'm going to turn to Wright real quick then, because it's like the interesting thing is twofold, right? You came together at Chrysalis, but there's probably something in the water at Princeton because you both went to Princeton. But Wright,
it goes deeper than that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Louisville, is the big small town.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife was a teacher at Moses High School.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So I've always heard about Moses.
Oh, so fun.
I watched Moses play basketball in high school.
Oh, wow.
And that's when we knew to recruit him as an intern.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Because my wife's like, I've heard that Moses would like to be an intern. I'm like, oh, great. So send him our way. And so that's how that's how it all started.
That's crazy. So we're going to shift into talking about the new strategy you're working on. But Wright, I want to take a little bit of time because I think part of these strategies, and I think it's important that we do talk about the stories because Moses' story is unique.
Yep.
Everybody's story is unique. Your story is unique. So talk to us about where you're from. I mean, your background, Marines to investments. What was that path like for you as you kind of were growing up?
I'm a Louisville native. And was also fortunate enough to go to Princeton. And I graduated from Princeton and went into the Marine Corps, where I was an infantry officer for 5 years, did 2 tours in the early 90s.
Where were you stationed?
I was stationed out of Camp Pendleton and did tours in the West Pacific and the Persian Gulf.
Okay.
And I loved the Marine Corps, had a great experience. Probably 2 tours was enough for me, and from the Marines' perspective, was probably good. So, came back, but I'd been an econ major and was always interested in finance. And I think I was always interested in finance because I like to see how people act and what people say they do and what people actually do with their money are different things. And so economics was sort of a way of trying to understand that. So started in banking and worked in investment banking for a little bit and did not understand that and wanted to be more of an operator. And so I was, it was the internet boom, and it was a time it's not that easy to get back to Louisville. And there are a lot more people that want to get back to Louisville than actually do, but the boom created that opportunity. So I came back to work with a broadband internet company, which was, a week away from going public in the March of 2000. And we can go through that whole, internet bubble collapse story.
Goodness.
But it was a Chrysalis investment. Chrysalis was a small investor in the business. But I helped manage it down from a business development perspective, and then I went to work for Chrysalis after that. So I always say it worked out well for me. And I came to Chrysalis with sort of the software IT. But I think what I'd always liked, I liked figuring things out, and I like growing businesses. And so when you ask me I like growing businesses, and I like working with CEOs to grow businesses. And the most satisfying thing about the journey is the working with the CEOs and seeing them succeed, because it's rare that there are there are 10-year overnight success stories, particularly if you're working with founders.
Yeah. And
have been fortunate. We just recently sold a business within the last month in the healthcare space. That was a lot. It was bringing information to a business to help it solve a problem differently. And for us, it was helping community oncologists make better decisions about how to treat cancer. So it was one of those things. It's return, but it's also its impact.
Yeah.
It was improving the healthcare system. But working with Clint Taylor, because Clint had a bad private equity experience before, and that means that you had business success, but did not have personal financial success. And so it was nice to see him actually get both.
Yeah.
so that's always that's the funnest part of the journey.
So for our listeners, some are going to be familiar with Chrysalis, and I think it's part of the story. Obviously, it's where you
emerge from.
Yeah, and so for those that aren't familiar, give us a little background, because like 30 years plus of investment experience between the team. There's one other member of the new team that's forming, Charlie, and so help us understand Chrysalis. And I think what's interesting about the new strategy is that Chrysalis has been investing in a lot of these spaces that have impact, right? Healthcare, education, workforce for a long time. So you've got a track record and experience on that side of it. And now with this new strategy that we're going to get into, but Chrysalis itself over the last several decades, what is Chrysalis, and what are some of the things that the experiences of that are now even helping shape what you're looking to do in the future?
Yeah, sure. So, I've worked at Chrysalis, still do, for 20 years. And so I think, Chrysalis was an institutional venture capital firm focused in the Midwest, focused on partnering with entrepreneurs to bring information to specific industries and transforming those industries with the use of information technology. And, David Jones Jr. is the founder of the firm and the chairman and one of my colleagues. And he's been on the board of Humana for 30 years and instrumental in the many transformations that big business is undergone. And so while we have always invested in a lot of industries and had success in different verticals, we're best known for healthcare. Mm-hmm. And then, David and his family also have education is their biggest philanthropic effort. Yeah. And so, that got us to look at education and training opportunities over the years. So we've actually, been an investor. We've invested successfully in K-12, college, and corporate training, and there just aren't a lot of people that can say they do that. Particularly K-12 is challenging. But so that's where I think that's where we have, there's a great network that's been built up over that period of time, and a lot of great network with specific industry experience in information technology, digital infrastructure, healthcare, education, and training. And as we emerge from that, we see opportunities in those sectors, but we see opportunities to be more growth investors. So let's help CEOs who've sort of figured out the venture stage and want to grow their business. And we also see the clear tie now between growth and impact. And for us, growth and impact is not only the right thing to do, it is the best financial thing to do, because growth and impact is going to outperform growth as a class.
Yeah. So both, you talk to me about that. Like, what do you mean when you say it's going to outperform? What does that mean for you? And how does that help shape the strategy you're pursuing?
Yeah, so I think if particularly in the sectors that we understand, if you're growing businesses, you're either growing impact or you're growing extraction. And you want to be on the side of growing impact. And when I say you're growing extraction, that means that in extractive businesses, your customers leave worse off. And unfortunately, and it's just the way those businesses had to be built, but in a lot of healthcare and education businesses and institutions, they're one size fits all. And not everybody has a great experience, and some people have negative experiences. And information technology gives you the flexibility to, these are important services that people need to experience, and they're important serious services that our society needs people to experience to have a thriving 21st century economy. And it's just simply no longer good enough for people to be worse off. And there are just too many stories, and then we can talk more about it later, but there are too many stories in education and healthcare where people, and those are particularly lower income people, are worse off. And we simply don't need to do that anymore. And we've been fortunate to be able to invest in businesses that have actually created positive impacts, across the board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the things I'll just pull out of that is, I think in large part owing to kind of that family office DNA that was sort of intertwined within the Chrysalis firm, even though it was kind of large institutional funds, it was still very much kind of had an ethos that was grounded in sort of some of David's experiences and perspectives, and really kind of got into the, we often had, sort of an impact mindset that wasn't defined in looking at those sectors specifically, right? And some of our greatest successes have been companies like Straighterline that Wright can talk to, and companies that have had really strong impact outcomes. But that's almost been, it was informed by that kind of perspective that we had at a firm, but it wasn't. It wasn't anything explicit. Like Straighterline they didn't position themselves as an impact company. That they didn't track or measure impact, and what we're seeing where we are today as the world sort of starts to get comfortable with the idea of impact and as the needs sort of kind of get highlighted by also information technology, as we start to see kind of some of the societal and second and third order effects of how kind of these industries tend to operate. There's just a tremendous opportunity to be purposeful about and call out that you're an impact company, and we think that it will be and it is now a competitive advantage to be.
Well, I think it's interesting because there's been this interesting convergence, right? So impact is transparent, measurable, and intentional. And so I think if you look at a Straighterline or many of the portfolio companies, you could probably run down a list of them. Not all of them, but some of them, they're already actually measuring this stuff because their business model is around some sort of service through K through 12, and it matters whether or not they're impacting what demographic of student or what type of community. And so it's just that, in our current day, what didn't exist in common vernacular or with maybe intentional measurement is now kind of coming. So a lot of these companies that Chrysalis would have targeted, I have to believe, would have been right in the crosshairs of an impact company. And so now we've got this convergence of kind of better definition around impact and thinking through intentional structures, and investors really wanting to care about this.
Yeah, and I think that's, at least for me, as we emerge from 2020, it is the imperative of marrying growth and impact together. And I always think about it from a CEO perspective. So for your company, marrying growth and impact together will sharpen your culture. It will sharpen your mission. It will help you in recruiting. And we're already seeing that in our portfolio, and it's going to help you on your exit. Yeah. Because I think, we've sold a lot of businesses to strategic, big companies, and when they want to grow, they buy growth. When big companies want to innovate, they often buy innovation. They are now increasing. I was listening to Jamie Dimon talking to David Axelrod on that podcast. He's like, it's just time. And so big companies are going to want to buy impact. And if you can do all three, and a lot of you can if you're just intentional about it, it will enhance your value. Yeah. So this is not a distraction. This is not a sideline. This is a value enhancing strategy that is both the right thing to do and is good business. And we're forming Ariba because we want to be intentional about how we help our portfolio. And so we've got a lot of experience helping people grow their businesses. I think as, impact is still somewhat loosely defined, and I think some people fear it because they think it's constraining. It's actually liberating. It sharpens your message. It's flexible, but it is a framework to help you explain what you do in ways that other people can understand it. Yeah. And so one of the ways we add value to our portfolio is also helping them actively with their impact story, what metrics they choose to measure, how they report on them, and how they deliver on them. And we just think that it is a value-enhancing strategy that will be increasingly important.
So you both have mentioned it already. I think whenever something new starts, you go through the whole, it's like having a child, choosing the name. Because it has specific meaning and it's a part of the story and what you're pursuing. So maybe both of you talk to me about Ariba. What is it, and how does that name important to the strategy as you kind of look to the future?
Yeah, so Ariba is now this new. It's a new firm, kind of, right? Charlie and I are emerging from, our context to form kind of a dedicated growth equity firm focused on impactful growth investments. And Ariba, the name, is a Rwandan word. It's iriba, which are like natural freshwater wells up in the mountains. Rwanda is called the land of 1,000 hills. It's really mountainous country. And one of the things that you find up in the mountains are these kind of really hidden but incredibly valuable just freshwater wells, and they've got they're important, and it's a kind of one of those distinctive cultural terms, and you can almost think of it as an oasis, and it relates to really some of the core strategies at the heart of the new firm.
Yeah.
And so as we were thinking about names and Moses suggested it, I think and I learned more about it. I think what I really gravitated to it because in terms of what we do, impact, growing businesses is hard. Impact is hard, it's challenging, and particularly in the sectors that we're in, which is healthcare and education, because you need to understand digital infrastructure and access. And as I think about Rwanda, so the geology, so if you're an expert in finding those really rare, valuable wells, you have to understand the geology, the ground. You also need to understand the weather and the rain and the water runoffs for how water is going to form in these wells. And that's, I think, about how you find value in healthcare and education, is you have to understand accessibility and internet infrastructure and digital infrastructure, because access is still a key problem to how overlooked populations in our country access important services. And so you have to understand access. And that gets you to issues of the digital divide. Can you afford a video unlimited bandwidth connection and things like that? So you have to, if you're going to create value, both business value and impact, you have to understand that. And then you got to understand the water runoff and the weather. And for me, in healthcare and education, these are regulated, third-party payer industries where the services are provided by a range of for-profit and not-for-profit institutions, but the government or somebody else pays on behalf of everybody, and particularly for overlooked populations because they couldn't afford to otherwise. And so it's how you navigate that geology and that terrain that gets you to the value. And particularly in healthcare and education, if you're not careful, when I talked about extraction, you're not growing impact, you're growing extraction. And there are landslides in that where you can grow your business, but it makes people worse off.
Yeah. And
so I think that's part of the dynamic of you gotta navigate your way through that terrain to find value. But we have a history of doing it, and I think it's just time to be intentional about it.
And it's great because I think it's been fun. I mentioned it that Moses and I work together, but Moses is on our investment team and has been for 4 years at Access Ventures. And so it's neat to kind of see the maturation of a professional journey to kind of continue to align both the skill of investment and the ability to find and help grow companies, but then also the intentionality of impact. And so you mentioned the challenges of impact. I'm curious, as you've been building this strategy, I think it's helpful for people just to be honest about what are those challenges. And so as you think about your portfolio companies or even the strategy itself, Ariba and the new firm, what do you foresee some of those challenges being related to kind of this impact orientation? Again, right, like you said, being intentional about it. That's important, but it's also difficult. And so where you sit now, what are some of those challenges that you are pressing into to seek to figure out and solve for as you build this new firm?
Yeah, and so I said challenges, but I actually think as we started talking about this, one of the things I learned from Moses was it was a lot easier than I thought, and that it's flexible. There are frameworks for how you think about impact, and it's more a matter of intentionality and focus, because particularly if you're innovating in healthcare and education, it is likely that you're creating positive impact. Not always. You need to be intentional about it. But I think that it's easier than a lot of people think. You just have to make sure that the business that you're doing provides value to everybody in an interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if it makes sense to talk in more depth about that, in the like a lot of the status quo businesses in those industries are what I call the airplane model, and that there's a fixed number of seats, and the last seat is a very profitable seat to fill, and there's a lot of pressure to fill it. And in education, that means you fill it with someone that's honestly not prepared to go to college or for the training, and you're going to give them debt to pay for it. And if they don't succeed, they didn't get the education, so they flunk out after their freshman year like a lot of people do. They didn't get the education, and they leave in debt. And not only do they leave in debt, they leave with a particular brand of debt that you can't bankrupt your way out of. There's really no way to get out of it except to pay it back, but they don't have a job that's going to be allowed them to pay that debt back. So it is a lifelong burden. And honestly, for a fairly large number of students, their peers who never went to college are better off than they do. And I think we see the same thing in healthcare. And healthcare is super complex. But there are a lot of particular interactions like surgery that they are the most expensive course of action. And in some cases, they're bad for you. And that the surgery doesn't work, or back surgery creates scar tissue. And so people are actually worse off. Their health it is worse. The back surgery didn't work. It made their back problems worse, and they went into debt paying for it. And it's just time to stop doing it. And information, we don't create magic. Information, just like information technology does anywhere, It allows you to be more careful about how you segment and drive your business because you know more.
Yeah.
And so it's just targeting the value that you want to provide to the customer segments that you want to be provided. And I think for us, maybe the challenge is being intentional that you are going to bring that value to overlooked populations, because not every population in our country interacts with the healthcare and education system equitably. And so, how you interact with those systems depends on geography, where you live. It depends on your income level, and depends on your ethnic background. And as an impact player, you have to be conscious of including everybody in the journey that you're on. And that's the intentional part of it.
That's great.
Yeah, and I would say, right, I mean, I think it's easy, going back to kind of the front end of your response, it's easy if you're focused on growth and innovation to see and to execute an impactful strategy in these sectors. And I might even go as far as arguing that if you were, at a growth or a venture fund in these sectors, you ought to really consider and being sharp around and holding yourself to impact outcomes just because of the sectors that you play in. But it's also really hard. It's hard. I mean, first of all, it's hard for us in navigating kind of how you talk about and organize a fund. So there are some challenges on messaging. There are challenges on on structure, but it's also like there's significant gravity in these sectors away from growth, innovation, and impact, and gravity, toward the airline model that you just described. Just because it is, one, it's how most of the status quo has operated in the sectors, and then two, I mean, it is much more straightforward to make money kind of levering and rolling up the status quo and kind of growing the airline model that leads to to bad outcomes in these sectors. And so for the folks who are focused on innovation and on growth in the sectors, you start to see the picture. I mean, but I will also say, I mean, that it's hard even for those folks. There are a lot of people who over the last couple of decades have talked about, revolutionizing healthcare with technology and having great positive impacts. And because you are not familiar with the geology of that industry, you end up getting ground up by the machine. And that's something I know, I mean, Charlie can speak to really well, and Wright can on the healthcare side.
But I think also, it's another thing I've learned from Moses in this process and journey is that another reason I think that growth and impact is going to outperform growth, particularly in these sectors, is because aligned business models, and those are models where your stakeholders and your shareholders are aligned, are more sustainable, and they create more value over the long term. So as you're an investor and are interested in long-term growth, businesses that deliver both on growth and impact intentionally are going to be better long-term investments, and we think because they are going to offer more value, but we also think, from sort of a private equity perspective, they're going to avoid two corrections. And two corrections that we know are coming. We talk about, there's the interest rate correction, and we talk about the impact correction. I think that, to what Moses just talked about, what we see a lot of in some, not all, but in some private equity growth plays in the sector that are acquisition fueled and they use debt, they are consolidating extraction. Okay. It's not intentional, but that is exactly what they're doing. And that is going to come to an end. And we've already, most of us have lived through that in 2000. We all understand what an interest rate correction looks like. And I think the other correction is the impact correction. And that's where some combination of consumers and regulators just aren't buying it anymore. And I think the University of Phoenix, went through that. So the University of Phoenix had a value of $5 billion in 2011. By 2016, it was $1 billion. And that was driven entirely by consumer sentiment and regulation. And so they lost 80% of their value.
Wow.
And I think that they're, again, I think emerging from 2020, there is going to be more attention paid to businesses that are extractive, that may be high performing financially, but that do not create win-wins for everybody. And so I think as an investor in those, you run real risks that the carpet's going to get pulled out from under you. And of course, I can't say when, but I can tell you that investing in businesses that are intentional about combining growth and impact are going to sail right through.
Yeah.
And some of our Crystal's biggest successes have been selling businesses in the heart of financial corrections. One of our biggest returns ever was a company we sold in the fall of 2008 after Lehman Brothers had collapsed.
Wow.
But it was a healthcare information technology company that had good long-term value, and large corporations saw that and they were positioned to buy it. So,
and I think what's interesting is, back to the Jamie Dimon quote that you brought up, like it's just time.
Yeah.
And you see it in the news cycle, even like this week, we're kind of doing this podcast interview during Earth Day week, and just all of this movement around climate action and just how the private sector used to kind of somewhat be opposed to it, but now is like setting their own aggressive climate action agendas. And it's just time. And I think it's interesting for me, and I get excited about what you're building at Ariba, because I think, Wright, you've been in the industry for a long time, worked at a traditional institutional VC firm. That I think was doing some interesting and different things because of the who David is and kind of his kind of blended kind of personal life and how he has always done those things. So you've had the fortune of being there. But I have to believe too, like what I'm excited about is, a lot of the groundwork that some of our listeners have been a part of in building and shaping the field, so to speak. Impact, I think, on the surface resonates with most people. On a human level, it's like, yeah, I'd love to do that. But then when you get down to the measurement and the kind of the practical side of what does that mean and how do I evaluate the efficacy of this or that, that's taken time to build. Now, I don't know if we're fully there. I've talked with, folks on this podcast even just about that, but it's mature enough with like the Impact Management Project or IRIS or the SDGs or GEARS to at least give investors and firms enough handles to say, here's what we're thinking about, here's how we're intentionally constructing the strategy, here's what we're pursuing. Yes, trying to weight the expectation on the entrepreneurs, the CEOs, not overburdening them with additional tracking, but recognizing we need to do it. And they're going to build better, more profitable companies doing that.
But I think, as I've gotten into IRIS and the UN SDG goals, for me, those are EBITDA and software as a service recurring revenue. And, I believe it or not, those used not to exist. But it's a framework that allows you to easily explain your business to others. And the IRIS and UN SDG framework, it is an easy to use, flexible framework that allows you to explain your impact to others. in easy ways. And how we will measure impact in our businesses comes down to accessibility, affordability, and value. And all of our businesses will deliver on at least 2 and likely 3 of those. And so, so we have our financial return goals and we have our impact goals.
Yeah.
And they're pretty simple and they're pretty aligned. And we were fortunate enough to invest in a company called Steenrod. I think Steenrod's a good story that illuminates what we're excited about continuing to do. And so Steenrod's a company that we sold in April of 2020. So in April of 2020, we sold the company for a very good return for our LPs. It was a good time to be able to send a check back to folks. But Steenrod was a great story, and it was actually co-founded by one of our former Chrysalis colleagues, David Parento, who had met a well-known education entrepreneur and innovator named Burke Smith. And Burke and David's vision was that your freshman year of college should cost $1,000, and it can be delivered online in a proven fashion, and it provides a straighter line, particularly for lower income disadvantaged students. It provides a straighter line to a degree. And they were very successful in figuring out how to grow that business. But one of the key milestones that business achieved was and this is when we talk about, I'm gonna throw accessibility, affordability, and value, was when we proved the value. And so we were partnering with a well-known not-for-profit online university, and they had an ACT cutoff of 21. So you could not get in if you did not have that score that on the ACT. And we were able to work so that the students that didn't make that cutoff, we knew how to contact them. And what we learned and what we proved was that those students that completed successfully 2 or 3 straight-line courses and then went back actually had a higher graduation rate than the cohort that had scored 21 on their ACT and had gotten in the first place. Wow. And, in higher ed now, attracting students who are going to graduate and get a job and pay off their debt is very important. And so once we'd proven that really helped to accelerate our business. But for Steenrod, accessibility. So it was online education, which was available 24/7 with an internet connection. And I think, for people that aren't that familiar with education, accessibility is important because a lot of people are working students, and their ability to get to a fixed location on a schedule is not easy. And so the physical experience is not as accessible to them as maybe other people realize. So Steenrod was, very accessible.
Yeah.
Was it affordable? So Steenrod cost about $1,000 compared to the average college, which is going to cost somewhere between $10,000 and $30,000 or more. And so it was clearly, the metrics of how we think about affordability were clear. And
for the same product, by the way, right?
Yeah.
It's your introductory courses that are generally delivered in large lecture halls, now delivered online.
Yeah. And that was sort of the inside of this.
That's awesome.
Is English 101 as a commodity?
Yeah.
And Moses is going to pull me too much into an educational debate, and I don't want to go there on this. But I think on value. So once we prove that if you took 2 Steenrod courses, you were highly likely to graduate, that's value. And so this is a business that produced financial returns. It produced an important service that was affordable, accessible, and offered value to everybody. So it's a home run on all.
That's a great example. I think, and what I'm excited about, because I'm excited to follow your journey. It's been fun to be a part of it, both working with Moses directly and also helping kind of think through the nuance of the strategy, and Wright knowing you for several years now. But I'm excited to kind of follow along, because I think one of the things that I'm really excited about is is seeing something like this fully mature in Louisville, Kentucky. Obviously focused on North America, but I think very important verticals that many people in our communities across the nation are struggling with: workforce, training, education, healthcare, trying to solve some of those critical systemic problems, doing so through intentional metrics and impact. And I think also the other thing that's exciting is the where you are, the stage of company. Some of these companies that you're going to be working with maybe weren't impact oriented to begin with, although like a straighter line. So then in working with them, as you go through the diligence process, assessing their financial efficacies for the fund, but also helping them craft and shape some exciting ways that they can be more intentional about impact and return value both to the shareholders and the stakeholders in the community. That's an exciting thing, because in the impact space, we're always looking at gaps and how do we continue to build the infrastructure of this field. And you're bringing a solution, a strategy in growth equity that there aren't a lot of funds or strategies in.
Yeah. No, and I'll just say, Bryce, because you're not going to give me a chance to say it, you won't ask me the leading question. I think, it's just that you're excited to track the story or part of the story, but you're a critical part of it. You and TJ are, at least both for me, and in my personal arc and journey and story and the opportunities that I've had here to start to lead deals and to be at a position where I can, be part of a fund like this, but also in how we've thought about and pulled together the story. And it's not just story kind of for the purposes of marketing, but story for the purpose of how we organize what we do and how we think about what we do. I remember the earliest conversations I had with Wright and Charlie around impact. It was still like, hey, do we want to be in this universe? Like, are we going to hamstring our managers and kind of distract them from building their business and building value? And you guys have really been, and through my experience here, and then even directly through the meetings that we've had, and just kind of opening our eyes to the various ways you can structure and talk about impact and execute and really be sharp around executing sort of a business model that's delivering these great outcomes, and track it and measure it, because that's important too.
Sure.
But in a way that, and I think that's a message that I wish more folks especially in our sectors, but who generally may have had the similar ethos that we had at Chrysalis can get to hear. And it's a freeing kind of, it's an eye-opening kind of message.
Well, it wasn't going to be my question, but I appreciate it. I mean, too kind. But it actually is a great kind of note to go out on, insofar as I hope in season 3, as we've talked about conscious construction, that people are hearing that, one, it's a journey. 2, I think it's important that we actually get very specific about what we are, really defining that. And almost in some ways rejecting the notion that like all of them look the same. I think we've got to look at like, how do we look at what you're working on at Ariba and compare it against what Ariba's set out to do and other types of strategies in that similar asset class or type of capital or sector or industry? Because I think it's a spectrum, right? As long as it's intentional, as long as it's transparent, as long as it's measurable, we've got to be comfortable with this spectrum of understanding. And it's important that some strategies, the impact thesis is baked into the definition of that fund and the strategy itself, and it helps make decisions on what types of companies. And in other areas, it's maybe not as rooted in that core problem statement, but it's addressing industries where we know there are systemic problems and coming at that with principles of impact and helping these founders build in metrics to measure. And I think that's an important piece, which is making people comfortable with the fact that impact is important and it needs to be measured and defined. But what we first have to do is like, what are we trying to do? How are we going to do that? And it's been fun to kind of work with both of you, because ever since I've known Wright, even 10 years ago, I think when we first met at a breakfast, it was always a part of your vernacular and the reason you personally pursued these types of companies. And so it's neat to see kind of now a strategy come together where it can be really more matured into what's intentionally measured as you pursue impact. So it's exciting.
Yep. And again, I just think that being in the sectors we're in, being intentional about impact, it is a value enhancer. And we will increasingly see that.
To learn more about this exciting new growth equity opportunity, check out aribapartners.com. Well, folks, that's a wrap on Season 3. We hope you've enjoyed listening in as we work to unpack how a consciously constructed and dynamic strategy works. For us, we live in this work every day, and our goal with this season was to give our listeners a vision for how it's possible to align who you are as a person with where your money is invested. Pursuing impact doesn't have to be concessionary, and pursuing impact is not just a venture conversation either. Over the past several months, I've had the pleasure to connect with some amazing fund managers doing some amazing things. I hope you'll take the time to give each episode a listen and see if there's a way for you to personally begin this journey, or if you're already on it, to pursue even greater alignment. Stay tuned for Season 4, which is set to come out in early fall and focused on yet another exciting theme. To find out more and to stay up to date, subscribe to our podcast, drop us a review, and as always, I'm Bryce Butler with Access Ventures. Check out our work at accessventures.org. Thanks for listening.